The saloon doors creaked open like a coffin lid in the wind, and every head turned as Colt Walker stepped inside, boots caked with dust and despair. His spurs jingled like coins he didn't have, his hat pulled low to hide the fresh bruise on his cheekbone. Another unpaid debt. Another busted jaw. Another day he hadn't died.
Yet.
He ordered the cheapest whiskey and sipped it slow, like it might be his last meal. In the far corner, 3 men played cards without speaking. In another, 2 ranch hands whispered over a bloodied bandana. The whole place reeked of dry sweat, spilt liquor, and old ghosts. Colt didn't notice the man in black until he was already sitting beside him. No sound. No warning. Just a heavy-gloved hand setting down a folded document between them. "You Colt Walker?" the man asked, voice smooth as a snake sliding over stone. Colt didn't answer right away. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I represent Mae McCallister." Colt stiffened. That name rang louder than a church bell. Mae McCallister owned half of the territory between Del Rio and Dry Creek. Her cattle grazed on more land than some counties. And she was old, 75 if the rumors held true.
Rich.
Alone. Dangerous. Colt gave a short laugh. "She looking for a new fence post or a dog?" "She's looking for a husband." That made him pause. Then choke. "I'm sorry, what?" The man in black didn't blink. "She's made an offer. You marry her. She signs the ranch over to you. In return, you live with her on the property for the remainder of her life. Could be weeks. Could be months." Colt stared, unsure if this was a joke, a trap, or both. "Why me?" "She picked you. Personally." Colt's pulse stuttered. "She know I'm broke?" "She knows everything, Mr. Walker. Your parents were burned alive during a raid. You tried ranching, failed. Lost your girl to a banker's boy. You've got nothing left but grit, a decent aim, and a name no one bothers to say anymore." Colt downed the rest of his drink and wiped his mouth. "You make me sound real charming." The man stood. "She wants an answer by nightfall. I'd suggest you ride." By sundown, Colt found himself cresting the edge of the McCallister estate. The land stretched wide, golden fields burned orange in the twilight. The windmill creaked like an old man praying. And the house, 3 stories tall with wraparound porches and curtains that barely moved, stood like a fortress against the loneliness of the frontier. He was led inside by a silent butler. No name, no words. Just nods and doors. When he reached the parlor, she was already waiting. Mae McCallister sat upright in a dark green velvet chair, a teacup in her hand, silver hair pinned into a perfect knot. Her skin was lined like old leather, but her eyes were young.
Sharp.
Amused. "So this is the boy who's supposed to bury me," she said. Colt removed his hat. "Ma'am. Don't ma'am me. I've had enough false manners to last 3 lifetimes." He looked around. "Why me?" Mae raised one thin brow. "Why not you?" "Because I'm broke, worn out, and bad luck follows me like a shadow." "Exactly," she said, sipping her tea. "I don't want a polished gentleman. I want a man who's seen hell and spit in its eye. That's what keeps the wolves away." Colt didn't know how to answer that. She leaned forward. "You think I'm mad. Maybe I am. But I'm not lonely. And I'm not dying just yet. I need someone to hold this land when I'm gone. Someone with nothing left to lose, so maybe they'll finally fight to keep something." Her voice dropped, a rasp beneath her breath. "There are men who want this place. They've tried fire, poison, even bullets. But I'm still here. I won't last forever, but neither will they." Colt sat down across from her. "And what's stopping them from killing me too?" She smiled again, wolfish. "Maybe nothing. But if they do, I promise you'll die richer than you've ever lived." He looked at the papers beside her. "The will."
"The deed."
"You sign that," she said, "and I promise I'll make your life hell." "I've been through worse," Colt muttered. "Good," she replied. "Then you might just survive." They married at dawn. No guests. No priest, just a local judge who owed Mae favors. She wore a black lace dress and boots that looked like they'd been dug out of the war. Colt wore his cleanest shirt and tried not to look like a man wondering what he'd just stepped into. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No kiss. No vows. Just signatures and silence. Mae turned to him after and said, "Well, Cowboy, you're mine now." That night, Colt stood on the porch, watching the stars shift above the plains. The air smelled like mesquite and secrets. He thought about leaving, just riding off into the dark and forgetting the whole thing. But something in her voice and her eyes had hooked him. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about land. It was about war. A quiet one. One fought with shadows, silence, and graves that didn't exist. He turned as the door creaked open behind him. Mae stood in her nightgown, barefoot, holding a lantern. "You still think this is just about a will?" she asked. Colt hesitated. "Ain't it?" She stepped forward, eyes catching the flame like flint. "You'll learn soon enough. But when you do, remember this. I picked you, Colt Walker, because they'll never see you coming." Then she walked back inside and left the door open behind her. Colt stood there for a long time, staring into the dark. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The morning after the wedding came with no celebration, just a sky streaked blood red, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Colt awoke in a spare room that smelled of cedar and cold iron. No personal touches. No windows facing west. Just a Bible on the nightstand with pages stiff from heat and something scratched into the wood underneath. _ they watch at dusk. _ He dressed and stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching the grit beneath. The ranch stretched endless before him. Fences like scars, cattle lowing far off, and silence too thick for dawn. Mae was already out front, sitting in her rocking chair like she hadn't moved all night. She held a silver revolver across her lap, polishing it with a worn cloth. She didn't look up. "Sleep all right, husband? I've had worse." "Good," she said, "because things don't get easier from here." She motioned to a boy down near the stables. Colt squinted, young, maybe 15, long dark hair tied back, shirt 2 sizes too big and boots too small. The kid moved like he belonged to the shadows. "That's Jesse," Mae said. "Doesn't speak, but he sees everything. You want to stay alive, you listen to him." Colt raised a brow. "You keep a mute as a lookout?" "I keep survivors, Mr. Walker. Not talkers." Colt walked down to the barn, nodding once to Jesse, who returned nothing but a glance. Inside, the air smelled of manure and oil. Tools hung neatly. Horses snorted in their stalls. But there were things off, blank nameplates where branding should have been. One saddle missing. A blood-stained cloth tossed carelessly behind a hay bale. He turned to ask, but Jessie had vanished. At lunch, Dorcas brought out beans and cornbread. Her face was lined with time, but her eyes were sharper than broken glass. She slid the plate down without a word. Colt sat beside Mae on the porch. He watched Jessie walk the fence line. "Where's the graveyard?" Colt asked. Mae didn't answer right away. "Most ranches this size have a family plot," he added. She sipped her tea, then finally said, "We burned our dead." Colt frowned. "Why?" "No one rests easy out here." He stared at her, but she didn't elaborate. Just kept sipping that tea like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later that day, Colt took a horse and rode the perimeter. He wanted to understand the land, feel it under his boots, not just see it from a porch. That's when he noticed the far field. Fallow. Fenced off. Grass overgrown and buzzards circling low. He dismounted, unlatched the gate, and walked through rows of cracked stone crosses, unmarked, sun-bleached. There were no names, no flowers, no memories, just earth, silence, and something that whispered just below hearing. That's when he saw the bone. It jutted out from the dirt like a warning finger. Human, no question. Colt knelt beside it, brushing dust away with a hand that suddenly felt too cold. Then he heard hooves. He turned. Jessie sat on horseback just outside the fence, face pale and eyes wide. He shook his head once, sharp, panicked, then pointed to the ridge behind him. Colt followed his gaze. 3 riders stood there, watching, dressed in black, faces covered in red kerchiefs. They didn't move,
Didn't speak.
just watched.
Colt stood, slowly.
He tipped his hat, casual, slow, but his gut twisted like barbed wire. Jesse turned and galloped back toward the house. Colt didn't run. He walked, deliberate, every step echoing. When he mounted his horse and turned, the riders were gone. By the time he got back, Mae was waiting with her shotgun cradled in her arms.
You saw them, she said.
They see me too, Colt replied. They've seen you since the day you stepped on my land. They've been circling like buzzards, waiting for me to drop. Colt looked toward the hills. You said they tried fire and bullets. Mae's jaw tightened. And lies. They faked deeds. Filed false claims. I burned every one. Dorcas appeared behind him with a tin of water. Some things don't want to be buried. Some folks don't know when they're dead. Colt turned to Mae. Who are they? She stood slowly, groaning like her bones remembered too much. You don't ask the desert its name, Colt. You just try not to die in it. That night, the wind howled hard enough to shake the shutters. Colt sat on the porch with a rifle across his lap. Jesse kept lookout from the barn rafters. Mae didn't sleep. At midnight, Colt walked the halls of the house. Every creak of the floor sounded like a warning. At the end of one hall, he found a locked door. Heavy, reinforced. He tried the handle. Don't, Mae said from behind.
He turned.
That room's not for you. Then who's it for? Her face, lit by a single lantern, looked older than he'd ever seen it. It's for what's left. Colt stared at her, then stepped away. But something in him knew, whatever secrets this place had, they weren't buried. Not yet. Before dawn, Colt stood outside again. The wind had gone still. The stars hung low. And the far field, the one with no names, no flowers, no peace, felt closer than ever. The land breathed around him, slow and ancient. And in that breath he knew the dead weren't done with Mae McCallister. And neither were the living. The storm rolled in fast, no thunder, just wind sharp enough to peel bark from the cottonwoods and strip every loose nail from the barn roof. Colt stood beneath the porch awning, hat low, watching the land writhe beneath dust devils. The cattle were silent. Even the windmill had stopped spinning, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Jesse came running from the east field, face white, pointing toward the ridge. Colt followed his finger. Riders. 4 of them this time. Black coats, red kerchiefs. Same as before, but this time, they didn't just watch. They dismounted. Colt was already moving. He burst through the front door, shotgun in hand. Mae sat by the hearth, calm as a preacher at a hanging. They're here, he said. I know, she answered, not even turning. I was wondering how long it'd take. You planning to invite them in? They don't need an invitation. Mae stood, slower than she used to, but not without strength. She opened a drawer and pulled out a tin box marked Confederate discharge, William McCallister. Inside wasn't a discharge. It was a map, a photograph, and 3 yellowed telegrams that made Colt's hands sweat before he even read them. Mae took the photo and held it close. These were my sons.
Colt looked.
3 young men stood in front of a plow, shirts rolled up, rifles slung on their backs, grins wide as canyon skies. The youngest couldn't have been more than 17. They died fighting to keep this land. Not in some war, but against the same men outside. Colt read the telegrams. Each one marked deceased with a matching cause. Accidental, drowned, ranch fire. All within 2 years. All 3?
Colt asked.
Mae nodded. They didn't die in accidents. They were hunted, one by one. Colt paced the room, heart hammering. Why didn't you say something before? Because when a woman says outlaws killed her sons, they call it grief. When she says they were executed for refusing to sell land, they call it madness. Colt looked up. And now they've come for you. No, she said, voice barely above a whisper. They've come for you. He froze. Why me? Because I'm already dead to them. Legally. On paper. I faked it years ago, so they couldn't contest my will. They couldn't seize what they couldn't prove existed.
Colt blinked. Wait.
You're? Mae smiled grimly. Mae McCallister died of a fever 3 years ago, according to the county register. Buried out back with a casket full of rocks and a funeral only buzzards attended. Then what was this marriage?
Colt asked. A smoke signal, she said.
Something to draw them close. Flush them out. He stepped back. You used me as bait? Mae's eyes softened, but not with regret. I used you because I knew they'd underestimate you, just like they did my boys. But you're harder, meaner. You've already survived what they only pretend to be. Colt stared at her, jaw clenched. The betrayal stung, but not as much as the truth in her words. Before he could answer, gunshots cracked through the windows. Jesse yelled from the loft. Colt hit the floor, dragging Mae down with him as bullets splintered the walls. Basement. Mae shouted. They scrambled through the kitchen, floorboards rattling under boot heels, until Mae pushed open a trapdoor hidden beneath the stove. Colt dropped down first, landing in packed dirt and shadows. Mae followed, dragging the tin box with her. The basement wasn't just storage. It was an armory. Old rifles, crates of shells, TNT, kerosene jugs. Colt whistled low. You were planning a war. Mae lit a lantern.
No.
I was waiting for one. They loaded up fast. Jesse appeared seconds later, bruised but alive, bleeding from a nick at the temple. Colt looked him over. Can you shoot? Jesse nodded once. Then take high ground. Keep their eyes off the house. Jesse vanished again, silent as smoke. Colt turned back to Mae. If we make it through this, you're telling me everything. Mae handed him a long-barrel rifle. Fair enough. If we don't, you'll be buried with the rest of them. They emerged under cover of darkness, smoke from a burning haystack rolling thick across the yard. Colt crawled through it like a ghost, spotted one of the riders near the corral, and dropped him clean with a single shot. Another man screamed from the porch. Jesse's bullet, fast and unforgiving.
2 left.
Colt sprinted behind the feed shed, flanked the bunkhouse, and caught the third shooter mid-reload. They wrestled in the dirt, rolling over broken boards and sharp stones. Colt got the upper hand and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's temple. Silence returned. Only one left. Mae stood on the porch, shotgun aimed steady. And the last man walked forward, slow, bold, unmasked. Colt froze. He knew that face. Scarred cheek. Crooked nose. A patch over one eye. It was the same man who'd led the raid on his family's ranch. Hello, boy, the man said. Colt's voice cracked. I watched you burn my mother alive. And you were too small to do anything then. What's changed? Colt raised his rifle. Hands didn't shake. Everything. The gunshot echoed like thunder. And just like that, the last ghost fell. Mae didn't smile.
She didn't speak.
She just walked down the steps, knelt beside the body, and placed her son's photograph on the man's chest. Then she stood, dusted off her hands, and looked at Colt. We've still got one more thing to do, she said.
Colt blinked.
What's that?
Mae nodded toward the ridge.
Bury the truth, or let it breathe. He followed her gaze, heart still pounding, blood still hot. And somewhere, deep in the pit of his chest, something shifted. He didn't just want revenge anymore. He wanted answers. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the ranch already felt changed, like something heavy had been lifted or buried. Smoke still curled from the barn ruins, mixing with the morning mist. Colt stood by the porch with his shirt soaked in blood, some his, most not, and watched Mae McCallister sip her coffee as if the night hadn't happened. She looked older now, not in her bones, but in her silence. You knew him, Colt said, voice low. Mae didn't blink. I did. He's the one who killed my parents. I know. Colt's throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because grief clouds the mind, she said, and rage blinds the heart. You needed clarity. I needed time. She handed him a yellowed envelope. He opened it. Inside was a second will, dated years earlier. Everything, every acre, every horse, every drop of water and oil buried beneath the McCallister land, had already been signed over to Colt Walker. He stared at the document like it might vanish. You already gave me the land? Mae nodded. 3 weeks ago. You just didn't know it.
Why?
Because I needed to know what you'd do when the blood came calling. Colt ran a hand through his hair, pacing the porch. I buried 3 sons on this land, she said quietly. And when the 4th grave came, I decided I'd rather go down swinging. Colt turned. You thought I'd die for your vengeance?
No.
I thought you'd live through mine, she said. There's a difference. Dorcas emerged from the house with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Mae, then turned to Colt with a knowing glance. She's been planning this for years, boy. You just walked in when the fire was right. That day, the sheriff came. Colt expected questions. Instead, the lawman took one look at the bodies still cooling in the field and tipped his hat. Looks like justice found its way home, he muttered. Mae didn't answer. She just watched him ride off with the quiet of someone who'd outlived too many explanations. As the sun dipped low, Colt and Jesse dug graves out past the east ridge, where the wind whispered through long-forgotten cottonwood trees. They didn't mark the men, just shoveled dirt and left the earth to remember or forget. Mae didn't join them. She sat by the window all evening, staring west. That night, Colt found her in the parlor, holding a photograph, the one of her sons. I used to sit with them on this very floor, she whispered. Before the fire, before the screaming. Back when there were birthdays, burnt pies, and too many damn muddy boots. He knelt beside her. You gave them a voice again. She looked at him, really looked.
No.
You did. In the silence that followed, something between them settled. Not family. Not quite friendship. But something hard-earned and forged through fire. Mae's strength flickered after that. Her steps slowed. Her words thinned out. But she never stopped carrying that tin box. A week later, Colt woke before dawn to find her gone. He searched the entire house, then the porch, then the ridge. He found her seated beneath the oak tree, the one her first husband planted back in '47. Her hat rested in her lap. Her shotgun leaned against the trunk. And her eyes were closed. Peaceful, like the fight had finally ended. Colt sat beside her for a long time, not speaking. Just listening to the wind and the faint creak of the old windmill turning again. She'd left no note. No instructions. But in the tin box she always kept nearby, Colt found a final envelope addressed in sharp, angular script. To Colt Walker. Inside was a deed transfer, a second map with highlighted veins of silver and oil under the northern field, and a simple sentence. Build it again. But don't build it alone. Colt read it twice, then folded it with care. He buried Mae beside the oak with a stone carved from the hearth itself. On it he etched only, Mae McCallister, the last to fall, the first to rise. Years passed. The ranch became something new, part sanctuary, part stronghold. Jesse took over the livestock. Dorcas stayed in the kitchen, scolding anyone who dared get near her cornbread recipe. And Colt rebuilt. He planted new oaks. He built bunkhouses for wayward boys, for drifters with scars they didn't know how to name. The McCallister brand became a name feared in courts, not just in gunfights. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, Colt would hear her voice again. That right tone, laced with grit and fire. You'll do just fine, boy. And every year, on the day they first met, Colt would sit under the oak tree, hat in hand, and whisper a thank you to a woman who taught him that the dead don't always stay buried, and the past only stops haunting when someone's brave enough to finish what it started. Some called him lucky. Some called him a ghost. But around here, they just called him the poor cowboy who married a 75-year-old heiress and lived to inherit something far greater than land.